Rajiv and I, we've both come from Melbourne, Australia, and I look after Telstra's API strategy, or the go-to-market for our API strategy, and that's our developer program and the APIs that we release external to market. And we've got Rajiv as well.
Yeah, hi. One of the things that my father always asked me, what exactly do you do? And that's the hardest question to answer.
It's difficult.
But I look after all the technology aspects of stuff that goes into making the APIs available through the dev portal that we have, Telstra Dev. So I basically look at architecture, technology, and making some of the strategic decisions possible.
Cool. So since you don't know too much about Telstra, or at least most of you in the audience anyway, I'll give you a bit of a 101 with Telstra and where we've come from. So Telstra was founded in 1901. It was actually founded a few days after Federation. So that's where Australia stopped becoming a bunch of colonies and actually turned itself into a nation. And it was a mixture of two different aspects, or two different enterprises. One was the postal service, and the other one was the telegraph service, I guess the very, very early telephony service. And it was called Postmaster General, so being a government enterprise. Then in 1970, the Australian government decided to split that out into two different enterprises, one being Australia Post and the other one being Telecom Australia. And then if we fast forward again to the 1990s, that's where the government thought, hey, this will be a good thing to sell off and turn into a publicly owned enterprise. So during the course of the 1990s and into early 2000, that's where Telstra became fully privatised, and it was really opened up to the free market. And that's when we saw a couple of other entrants come into the market, into the telecommunications industry in Australia, and we have now Optus, Vodafone and Telstra as the three primary telecommunications carriers in Australia. But Australia, it's a big, huge place, and you know, we have a population of about less than 10% of what the US has, yet the area, the landmass of Australia is around about the equivalent size of the United States. So Telstra has a lot of areas to cover. So we have about 30,000 employees that work in Telstra at the moment. There's a lot of technicians that look after our mobile network and our fixed line network across Australia. And we make about $20 billion US revenue per year, which is actually pretty good. If I put that in the scale of the Fortune 500, the US Fortune 500, the top 500 companies in the US, we come at around about 100 to 120 in that list. So that's not too bad for an Australian telecommunications company that's only really serving around about 20 to 25 million people in the country. The other thing that's actually pretty important to realise with Telstra is our mobile network, our 4G network, it covers 99% of the population. So most of the population is around the coastal areas, but just think about that when I said before that we only have around about 10% of the population of the US sitting on a landmass that's the size of the US, yet we're able to cover 99% of the population. I think if you throw in that all the dangerous animals Telstra has, like sharks, crocodiles, spiders, snakes, everything, I think hats off to all those technicians that look after our mobile and fixed line network. And who can forget Tasmania? So I did notice this map was missing a little old Tasmania. It's also missing New Zealand, but that's all right. I added Tasmania in there at the least anyway. Apologies to the New Zealand folk. I probably should have added that in as well. So just a little bit more about Telstra and some of the products we run. We are a fully fledged telco. We do run a fairly big mobile network throughout Australia, and actually we do quite a number of world firsts as well. So with our mobile network, we were the first company in the world to build and launch a 3G network. Last year, we got a world record for our 4G network in our download speeds. We were able to get 1 gigabit per second on our 4G LTE network, so that's pretty damn quick, 1 gigabit per second. And I think just 2 weeks ago, we were the first company in the world to run the first commercial telephone call across a 5G network. So Telstra is very, very busy now rolling out our 5G network. So we do a lot of world firsts, and we kind of do have to punch above our weight because there is a lot of competition in the marketplace. Not just coming from the other carriers like Vodafone and Optus, but also a lot of the over-the-top players as well. So we don't just do mobile network. That is probably our primary product. We do IoT, we do devices. We have a lot of fixed line networks as well, subsea cables. We have both dark fibre and managed fibre. We also have a lot of broadband, although the broadband business is kind of going away a little bit. If you look at where Telstra's or where Australia is going, they're rolling out the National Broadband Network, which is another government-owned telco. I guess they thought in 1901 it was a good thing to start our own telco, so hey, how about we do it again? So the Australian government is rolling out a broadband network throughout Australia, which is largely complete now, so that means that broadband product primarily is going to be run by the Australian government. We also do a lot of cloud technology as well, so we're one of the largest resellers of cloud in Australia, so there are points of presence for all the major cloud providers, AWS, Azure, and of course Google as well, that have their region in Sydney. So we are a reseller of all those major clouds as well, and because clouds don't work without network, so the conversations that we have with customers, usually around network, also tie very well in with cloud as well. So that's a little bit about Telstra. What I'll do now is I'll hand you back over to Rajiv to tell you a bit of a story about where we are at with our Telstra developer program and our API program.
Yeah, I think it helps to set some context. So we want to talk about where we are today as we tell you this story of Telstra's API journey. So when you look at things today, we basically launched Telstra Dev. That's our home for everything APIs within Telstra. And we launched the portal, the Telstra Dev portal, around 10 months back in October 2017. Since then, we've launched 2 external-facing APIs, more than 20-odd internal-facing APIs. We've been really hard at work. So we do integration back into our billing systems. So all of that basically got developed in the last 10 months. And that's our homepage. We've seen a steady stream of developers come in and register with Telstra Dev, and this has increased gradually over the last 10 months. And what you'll find is that there are bits of peaks in between, and those basically correlate to events that we run regularly as a part of Telstra Dev. We also monetize our external-facing APIs, which means we've gained some significant knowledge in how to monetize APIs. What kind of strategies do you employ? How do you invite and entice developers to use these products? And our revenue has been growing, and it's kind of a reflection of how we are performing in terms of the APIs and services that we offer. And also, because we offer these core services, it's a reflection of how well our customers are doing as well when it comes to using the APIs. But this is where we are today. It wasn't always the case. And so David is going to walk you through, the history behind and leading up to this point where we stand today. Yeah.
Thanks, Rajiv. So it didn't all start off smoothly. So we're going to take you back, far back to the start of Telstra's API journey. It was a long time ago and an enterprise far, far away. So there is a bit of a theme here. And like any good story, there's always ups and downs, and that's exactly what we want to share with you today. We want to tell Telstra's story about our API journey, and what are we hoping to impart on that? Well, hopefully those of you that have yet to start a fully fledged API journey, there's some lessons you can get out of this, because this is the real journey that we've been on. And if you have already started your API journey in your company, hopefully there's a lot of parallels as well with what you're doing and what we're doing, and so that'll give you some validation that what you're doing is the right way to go. So we'll tell this story in 3 parts, and it started all the way back in around 2014 where we started a team to build these RESTful APIs to try and free up our IT systems. It's a bit of a nerd thing, isn't it, doing the software thing, but hey. So the first episode in softwares, and it really was a new hope for us, this API journey that we went on. When we started this journey in 2014, Telstra had already been on a number of API journeys in the past, and this is not unique to Telstra. It's a common thing with a lot of other enterprise organizations as well. We started down the SOA path. We implemented a layer 7 platform at the time, and we created a bunch of SOAP-based APIs. And for some reason or another, they didn't take off.
I wonder why.
Don't know why. So that was in about 2009. And actually, before we even started this in 2014, I did a bit of an audit in Telstra about how many API platforms have we got out there. And at last count, there was 6. We were quite schizophrenic. I think we just liked every vendor's solution, and so we got in everything from Layer 7 to MuleSoft to Axway to everything. But this was a bit different, and we took a different approach to this. And I'll go through some of the things that we hit on that actually made this first chapter of the story quite successful. They were things like having a great platform, a dedicated API team, executive sponsorship, a business-led program rather than a technology-led program, and a few other special ingredients that actually made this first chapter quite successful for the first couple of years. So let's start from the start. Having a business-led strategy. So one of the things we looked at when we saw technology programs and API programs in Telstra that didn't quite take off was they were all technology-led. And the challenge with focusing on technology was it wasn't linked to business outcomes. There was nothing that was intrinsically linked back to the success of the business. So when our executive director put the business case together or put the board paper together to actually start this program, it was coming at it from a business angle. It was talking about developers, external developers in particular. It was talking about monetizing APIs and how we could unlock our IT systems and how we could try and create a moat around Telstra that could protect Telstra's value by releasing these open APIs. So that was a key ingredient, and that really helped drive the theme of the API program throughout with the team that we created, was really focusing on business outcomes first, not technology outcomes. The next key ingredient was having a dedicated API team. And this wasn't a massive team. This was a very, very small team. As a matter of fact, the team started as big as you can see on the screen. So I played the role of the API team manager. We had an API architect. We had an API product manager, a senior software developer, and we had 2 developer evangelists that played the bit of the role of the developer evangelist, plus managing the program as well. And so that small team, its pure focus was on successfully executing the API program. And if I look at where we are today, I guess we've got a dedicated API team still today. But they weren't sort of borrowed from the business. This was all part of the business case that was put up to create a successful API program, was having people purely dedicated to getting the API strategy successfully executed. The next important ingredient for us was having an executive champion. I don't know if it's 100% critical for all API programs, because some businesses just get it. But for Telstra, we've got a lot of things to concentrate on. I just went through before some of the list of the products that we have out there in the market, from broadband through to subsea cables. I think we run about 90 to 100 or so data centres, and our mobile network as well. So getting airtime and air coverage with senior executives in the company is very, very difficult. So having an executive champion that could help put together the board paper, present that back to the board, and then fight for a business case to fund the API team and fund the construction of our API platform and a set of APIs was really important for us. It helped us bring together some senior stakeholders that we needed to get hold of and bring into the room to make success happen. Because a lot of those systems are still managed by other areas of the company. They weren't managed by our API team. If we think about all the mobile systems, billing systems, other operational systems, they're managed by different and disparate parts of a large enterprise like Telstra. So bringing those stakeholders in the room and getting them to play ball would be extremely difficult if it was just ourselves and our new team, and having that executive director really helped push that through. Our executive director also provided a lot of air cover as well. So whenever we struck problems or issues that we needed to push through, they were able to do that. They were able to pull the right people in the room, or they were able to help ensure that what we were doing was right for the company. Because to be honest, we were doing something a little bit different, and it was ruffling a few feathers. I mean, there's not too many telecommunications companies in the world at that point in time that said, hey, we want to open up a lot of APIs out to the market. It did make a lot of people concerned about how we would do that, and would we do that in the right way and still keep people's privacy and security at heart. So having that executive director air cover certainly helped break those conversational loops that we kept on going on with privacy, regulatory, and other people around the company. The business case, well, that's where the dollars come into it. And if we look at the previous ingredients that we had, having a business-led strategy and having a board paper presented that was accepted by the board that spoke to purely business-led outcomes for our API strategy, having a dedicated API team, and especially having the executive director all together, those previous ingredients helped us get a business case up for the seed funding that we needed. And that seed funding, again, wasn't massive for a company that makes $20 billion revenue a year. We're only talking a few $1 million here, but that was enough for us to fund the team, fund a platform, which we used Apigee as the API gateway. And that was after doing quite a fair bit of analysis of a lot of other products out there, but we found that the Apigee gateway was most aligned to the business outcomes that we were trying to push for. They had modules in there such as monetization, which the other API gateways didn't have, that allowed us to be able to not only take APIs out to market, but use the engine to do rating and monetize and plug those back into our billing system. So it enabled us to build that great platform from day one, and also allowed us enough funding to build a great set of fundamental APIs that talked about the value Telstra could bring. So with that, we built APIs like our SMS API. There's much like services that you might know of, like from Twilio, for example, that allow you to do SMS send and receive from Telstra's systems. So with those core ingredients in place, executive director providing the champion role, a dedicated API team that his pure focus was on delivering the API strategy, a business-led API program, an API platform with a set of APIs that were built thanks to some funding from a business case. It was those core ingredients that helped us build a first successful set of APIs. But as we got into the API program, one of the things we realized, because nothing beats actual experience in doing things, was instead of actually building them all ourselves, which we went in with, I said, let's build a great API team. We can pump out all these fantastic, beautiful, high-quality APIs that are all built to a specific standard. We quickly, very, very quickly realised, and I guess common sense and hindsight really plays a part here, that we wouldn't scale. We didn't think we'd be able to scale that too far. We thought we'd be releasing, maybe 4 or 5 APIs a quarter with this team in waves, and we thought, geez, this is not the way to transform a company. So after a few months into the program, we very, very quickly pivoted and said, look, let's move away from this centralized model of API construction and move into a decentralized model where we could use more of the distributed power of Telstra to be able to power up these APIs. And so we created that. We created this democratization of the platform. And I think that was also a key element as well, creating an open platform within the company that anyone in the company, any team, any work cell could come onto the platform, build their APIs, follow some guidelines, and then release their API either out to market or internal within the company. Now that was interesting. We launched that probably about 4 or 5 months, that decentralized model, 4 or 5 months after we started in February of 2015. We launched that in July of 2015. 12 months after that was launched, we had anywhere between 200 and 300 API products that were launched from that platform. Whereas if we had been trying to do it ourselves, we probably would have got no more than 50 APIs, high quality APIs built in that time frame. So in that time frame, we were able to get orders of magnitude more by decentralizing our API model rather than having it go through a single team. So that were the key ingredients at the start of our program. But unfortunately, the enterprise always strikes back. How many of you have worked in a really big enterprise before? You know, we're looking, thousands of employees, so you'll know what I'm talking about. So nothing stays the same forever, right? And that's what happened. So a couple of years after we launched the program, things were going great. Things were really singing along. We had, hundreds of APIs, lots of developers coming on, and sometimes, when it's not broken, people still love to come in and fix things. And Telstra is also going through a lot of change as well. So remember I spoke about the national broadband network coming on. Well, that was taking a big revenue stream away from Telstra as well. So that was forcing a restructure on the company. Over-the-top players were forcing the same thing. Telstra made a lot of acquisitions as well. So there were a lot of company restructures at that time. So unfortunately, our executive sponsor moved on to other things and eventually left the company. And the API team as well, they moved on to other things after a couple of years. And so we were kind of just left with poor old me trying to run the program. Didn't quite work that well. But it wasn't just the team members moving on, the executive sponsor moving on that lost us the air cover. The platform also shifted to IT. That wasn't a great move either. It was good for IT because then IT could really accelerate their outcomes, but the change that actually forced upon us was that, or upon me, because I was the last one left, was that it was no longer focused on business outcomes. All of a sudden it was focused on internal outcomes. And what we found was, bureaucracy started to creep in, checklists started to creep in, and I guess this cost efficiency model started to try and kick in. And there wasn't as much effort put into making a great platform and a great developer experience, and there's more effort put in to, well, how can we reduce the costs here, and how can we make sure we make this more secure, less risky. And so there was this more risk-averse approach, which you can sometimes get with technology-led outcomes. So IT took control, and they wanted to offset all that risk by putting in big checklists and pushing problems onto, I guess, the customer or the creator of the API. And so that then also led in turn to capital investment changes as well. So it shrunk the capital investment in the platform, which was really underpinning a lot of the API program. But the API program itself, that capital investment was just booming. Again, there were still lots and lots of APIs getting created, but they took slower and slower to come out to market because of all those changes in removing the API team, shifting the platform across, restructures, and of course the shrinking capital envelope on the platform as well didn't help because we couldn't improve the platform efficiency, we couldn't improve the developer portal, even though we knew what we had to do to make it a better platform than what it was. So that's sort of the summation of where we hit that bottom of the bathtub curve, where we ended up going through a lot of restructures, losing the team, our executive sponsorship, the platform got shifted across to another group, and then we also lost a lot of capital investment as well. But like all good stories, though, there's always a third chapter.
Yeah, that makes me feel like Skywalker. but I'm going to sound like Yoda. It's best of both worlds. So around about a year back, I've had the opportunity to kind of view Telstra's journey both from an external vendor perspective. So for the 2 years that David just spoke about, I was sitting on the outside with Apigee and Google, kind of watching and wondering, why is this thing not happening? And what's happening with this API program? And the last year, I've kind of, been in Telstra as an employee, and that's kind of, it's turned my understanding around why it didn't work. And so around a year back, when I joined Telstra, David and I decided that, we were going to hit the reset button with this API program. And that's when we launched Telstra Dev. That's Frobot, that's our logo for Telstra Dev. And so what I'm going to be talking about today is like specifically the lessons learned. There were certain key business decisions that David and I took when we started this journey, and there were technology implications because of those decisions. And so I want to walk through 4 of those key decisions that we took, and hopefully that'll help you also establish these rules as you go into your programs, or if you're already running those. So you've heard David today talk about the fact that when the platform was initially established, it was with business. In fact, in the keynotes today, you would have heard Ursula also talk about the fact that the engineering had to move into the business in order to make a platform successful. So the first thing we did was we decided that Telstra Dev was not going to be about cost cutting. It was going to be part of revenue stream generations for Telstra. And that basically meant we make a few key technology choices. The first one was that we had to own the design and engineering of Telstra Dev. And so, we brought the team back in. We've set up a team. It was just me and David, and then we've slowly increased that capacity. And the other thing that we realized is that we didn't want to offload our support and operational aspects of the platform to anybody else. We wanted to manage that ourselves. So we now own the Telstra Dev's, operational support, design, and engineering. And that's really helped us quite a bit in terms of, because we own the outcomes for the platform now, and we are responsible for it. The second thing, and David also touched upon this, is the fact that we had launched APIs in the past. And when we launched the SMS API around 2 years back, we really didn't have any interaction with the developers. So we launched it, and then it got adopted because, well, it's the messaging service that Telstra provides, so there were developers who took it. But this time we took a very different approach. So around about the same time that we were trying to deliver Telstra Dev, we also opened up the messaging API. We invited developers. We invited our product managers from the backend team that actually support the messaging API infrastructure. And we invited the engineering team that owns the infrastructure as well into the same room. And that basically meant that we had a great opportunity to learn what these developers wanted. So they were actually trying the APIs as it was getting designed. And so we got feedback around what kind of specifications they were looking for, what error messages did they want, what kind of documentation were they expecting. And this was an eye-opener for product managers because this is key data. You're releasing a product that somebody actually wants. The other thing that we understood via the beta programs was the value of an API. Now, when you design an API, we were thinking that we would charge by transaction. So every API call that you make, we would monetize that. But when we spoke to the developers, it quickly became apparent that they valued the API in terms of the messages that actually got sent and not the API itself. So they would send one API call, but behind the scenes it could mean like 2, 3, 4, 5 messages, and that's what they were willing to pay for. And so this gave the product managers an opportunity to understand and correct the value proposition that we were going to offer to the developers. The other thing that we did was, as we watched that interaction between the developers, the backend engineering team, and the product managers, we realized that there was a conversation that happens when two experts talk to each other, and you really don't want to be in the middle of that conversation, breaking it up. And so it became fairly apparent that developers were telling us they didn't want to really invest until they had tried the API. So we had to make sure that our platform was capable of providing free trials. The other thing we understood, like I said, was that they were willing to pay for the messages that were getting sent. So that was on a pay-as-you-go model. Nobody wants to pay you upfront for things they don't want to use. We are seeing all of this with these cloud models. So being able to set up that. And for the product managers, when we spoke to them, their commitment was, well, how do we charge? How does that go back into our billing systems? What kind of charging mechanisms will we allow? Will there be, will it go to a Telstra bill? What kind of models will we support? How do we charge, etc. So, and how do we package these APIs and actually make them available? So that beta program basically told us that we had to sit back, make the platform able enough for these guys to be able to do their day-to-day jobs, which is publish APIs, package products, put them onto the portal for the developers to come in, try them out, and then eventually buy those products. Now, if you know that there are interactions that are happening, then the one thing that comes out of all of these interactions is data. And that data is in the form of, obviously APIs getting consumed, but there's also data for, developers in terms of how much have they actually used, what is the, how much charges have they incurred, how real time can it be. So it's generally, if you go to any of these, if you've dealt with a telco before, you'll realize you get the bill at the end of the month, and then there's a shock sticker attached to that. But our goal was to ensure that developers can get some of these metrics real time. And like David said, we are using the monetization module from Apigee, and that allows us to actually show some of these charges in near real time to developers. The other thing that we decided was that we were generating a lot of data via the platform, and we were using that to, for example, understand when we wanted to deploy changes into the platform, when was the best time to do those deployments, and obviously the API traffic, which we want to surface back to the developers in the form of stats that they can use and understand behind the applications. For the product managers, it was interesting because they were looking to understand what is the revenue stream and how much revenue do they generate from APIs, who's consuming, how many apps are consuming those APIs, and they wanted an ecosystem for themselves as well. So really the platform became that possibility for developers and product managers to basically collaborate and just get better at whatever they were doing together. So I guess in summary, David's covered a lot of these as in terms of the story that we went through. We've brought back the platform into the business. We have a dedicated team that manages and operates the Telstra Dev platform. So we are a team of about 10 folks. So, and we have operational responsibility, support responsibility, design and engineering responsibility for the platform. So it's our baby. It's all the outcomes that come out of it are our responsibility. We've also ensured that any API that we release out into the public goes through beta trials, where we get external developers, partners, etc., to come in and actually try these APIs. The third thing, I guess, is understanding that if you're in the business of platform, you don't want to be in the middle trying to hold two experts or get in the middle of two expert conversation. And so you have to think like an enabler, which is provide the mechanisms for them to do their day-to-day jobs without having to come to you. And last is use data to the best possible extent, but also make that data available back into the ecosystem, to the developers, to your internal stakeholders, so that they can action that data.